Hello. I want to welcome everyone to this program at the Western Illinois Museum, both in the room and anyone watching online. Tonight's presenter will be Erika Holst from the Illinois State Museum. She's the curator of history there. And we learned about her through the Illinois Humanities Rhodes Scholar Program. She has several publications in her history. She has written books titled Wicked Springfield, Edwards Place, and Historic Homes of Lincoln's, Illinois. We had a partner program with this of local presenters last week who told us about 19th century clothing and showed artifacts from the museum. And tonight, Erika will show items from the collection of the Illinois State Museum. And afterwards, there will be a chance to ask her questions and give any comments that you are wondering about from what you hear. So thanks so much for coming, and I'll give it over to Erika.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm sorry not to be there in person. That was the original plan. And I was watching the forecast all day. And at midday, when it seemed like it was time to make a call, there looked like there was going to be a gnarly line of storms passing through. I don't know if they've since dissipated. So I was sad not to be there in person, but then I thought I would be sadder if I was flattened by a tornado on the road home. So I decided to play it safe. So I really appreciate your flexibility and letting me zoom in. And again, I'm sorry I'm not there in person. But tonight I'm going to be talking to you about the life cycle of clothing. So this is going a little bit beyond just, the types of clothing people wore and looking at how clothing affected people's lives and kind of the relationship and investment of time and labor that people put into their clothing, mainly focused on the 19th century, but the practices I'll discuss carried on well into the 20th century. So maybe some of you remember doing some of these things yourself or your mom or your grandma. So this talk got started, and I'm sorry, let me see. I can't see you, so if something is awry, if you can't see my screen, if something's gone haywire, please just speak up and tell me, because I'm kind of flying blind here. But this talk was inspired by an exhibit that we had at the Illinois State Museum a few years ago called Fashioning Illinois that looked at 19th century women's clothing. And the exhibition started just as a way to get our really phenomenal collection of 19th century women's clothing out on view. It had never been shown before. And as we were doing research into the garments, we were struck by how much clothing and textiles loomed large into the lives of your average Illinois woman. And so we wanted to learn more about that. And then what we came up with kind of presents an interesting contrast to today, where we have fully made the transition from producers of clothing to consumers of clothing, and that's kind of changed our lifestyle accordingly. Before I dive in, I want to give you a little bit of background about the Illinois State Museum. This is where I work. We are on the Capitol Complex in Springfield, Illinois. So in that image, you can just see the very top of the Illinois State Capitol building behind the big rectangle of the museum. Our museum focuses on science, natural history, anthropology, history, and art. We are open 7 days a week. So if you're ever in Springfield, please do drop in and see us. There's always something new going on. And I'm the curator of history there. So what does that mean? I basically am in charge of the collection of historic objects in the museum's larger collection. So there's about 20,000 items, some of them amazing and fascinating, and also like 6 spinning wheels with no provenance. So it kind of runs the gamut. But my job is to develop the collection, make sure it reflects our mission, reflects the stories and the experiences of the people of Illinois, and then share those collections through talks like this, through exhibitions, and through public programming. We're always adding to the collection, and I always want to hit a highlight of something new and cool that we've gotten. So people ask me what my favorite object in the collection is, and it's sort of like picking one of your children. It's very hard, but if I had to pin it down, I would have to say the collection of garments that belong to a woman named Carolyn Sutherland. So she was married in 1856. She's from New York State, and she and her new husband moved to Rockford, Illinois, immediately after their marriage. And within the span of a year, Carolyn went from a bride, a young wife, an expectant mother, a mother. Sadly, her child only lived a couple weeks, so she buried her child. She was a bereaved mother, and then she died herself in 1857, 1 year almost to the day after her wedding. And in 2019, one of Caroline's descendants gave us a trunk full of her clothing that had been packed away at her death and basically sat within the family for more than 150 years. And so in this trunk of clothing, these garments, you basically see the arc of Caroline's life, that transition from bride to mother, and then, the last things that she wore. And one of the most fascinating, something I haven't seen in any of the other garments in our collection, a pair of her linen drawers. And you can see an image of the waistband there. It's stamped with her laundry mark, C.A. Sutherland. And then after her death, her sister-in-law, Mary, got a hold of them and crossed out the C.A. Sutherland and wrote in M.H. Sutherland and kind of appropriated those drawers for herself, which to 21st century, people like us, seems like kind of a line that was crossed, like, would you really take a dead person's underwear? But going through this talk, hopefully we'll see a little bit of how labor intensive making clothing was, and probably she felt like she was going to save herself a few stitches and a few hours of her life. So that said, I do have to do the shameless plug. We're always looking for things to add to our collection. Most important to us is things that have a connection to Illinois and a cool story behind them. I say it's kind of like the pornography philosophy of collections acquisition. You know it when you see it. If it's something that really kind of grabs you and speaks to a very human moment in our state's history, we're definitely interested. So if you have something you think belongs in a museum, and it's not from Macomb or Western Illinois, so outside the Western Illinois Museum's scope, then please shoot me an email. I'd love to hear about it. So before we get underway, I just want to ask you to pause a little bit and reflect on, where did the clothes that you have on come from? Probably most of us in the room bought them. If you can remember where and why and when you bought them, give that a little thought. And now we will dive into the world of making clothing in the 19th century. So throughout the 18th century for men and most of the 19th century for women, all clothing was made for somebody, not for anybody. And this is right off the bat a huge contrast with today. I can go to a store and grab a, size medium or large top off the shelf and I wear it and it's fine and it's blousy and it's comfortable. Clothing in the 19th century was very specific to a person. And this was a challenge that we had when we mounted that fashion exhibition, because I did not have a stellar budget where I could get custom mannequins for every single garment. I had $100 per mannequin to spend on Etsy. And so I got all these styrofoam things. And then my task was to, most of the time, shave them down with an electric knife to make them fit our garments, which were very small and also very distinct. Each woman's shape is unique. The size of her bust, the size of her waist, the size of her hips. And so it was a matter of kind of trimming these mannequins down and building them out so they would fit these garments, which obviously we weren't going to alter. And all 19th century women knew how to sew. And I say that pretty much without exception. There were perhaps some women on the very extreme ends of the scale, both rich and poor, who didn't know how to sew, but it was considered a basic life skill for women. In fact, there was a line in a ladies' domestic advice manual from the 1840s that said, "A woman who does not know how to sew is as deficient in her education as a man who does not know how to write." So on the left, you're looking at a lady's sampler there. And this is something that would have been accomplished by a more well-to-do woman, someone who is sent to a ladies' seminary or a finishing school. And at schools like this, women would receive an education, which, by the way, before the 1850s, there's no public education. So education for any kid is kind of optional, and for women it's super optional, because if you're in a household with limited means, you're going to educate the son, not the daughter. So sending a girl to school at all was kind of a status symbol. It meant you could spare her from the household work, you could afford the tuition, you were investing in her. And so these samplers that women came out with had ABCs and numbers as a way of showing that they had mastered reading and writing, and then also the embroidery was kind of like a little extra, like, you know, a fancy skill that she had picked up. And so these samplers would be displayed proudly in the home as that status symbol. On the right, you're looking at, this is called a darning sampler, and this was created in the 1890s. It's hard to see, I'm sorry, it's a lot of white on white, but this was a textile that a girl created to show her mastery of all kinds of what was considered plain sewing. So there are ruffles, there are tucks, there are eye holes, there are buttonholes, there's darning, there's patching on there. It's all the sewing skills that a girl or a woman would need basically to manage her household, of which there was a lot of sewing work going on. And sewing was so synonymous with women's work that it was called work. And when people said, I've got to do my work, and you are a woman, they automatically knew that they were talking about sewing. So on the left is the contents of a work basket, which is the sewing basket. And on the right is a work stand from our collection. This belonged to a woman who lived in Tremont in the 1840s. And of course, work, again, synonymous with sewing. So one of women's duties, unending duties that started when she was a child and continued on as long as she was able to see clearly enough to keep on sewing, was to keep the household clothed and maintained in textiles. So things like creating sheets, towels, diapers, handkerchiefs, pillowcases, creating them, and then keeping them mended was women's work. And then also there were certain garments that a woman would make within her own household herself. And those tended to be her own undergarments. You can see on the left, this is a chemise. So the chemise, and you might have talked about this last week at your presentation, is the basic foundational undergarment. It's the thing that a woman is going to wear closest to her skin. So if you ever see someone wearing a corset, pretending to be from the 19th century, and they're just wearing it on their skin, that's like so wrong. They would have a chemise on under it. And the chemise is, first of all, it's going to like protect you from the scratchy and rough outer garments that you're wearing. And it's also going to protect those garments from you. So all the, you know, sweat and oil and ick that comes off a human body every day is going to go into that chemise. And so like a fresh pair of underwear, you would put on a clean chemise every day if you were able. Women would also create their children's clothing, especially young children. You're looking at a baby dress, which 19th century infants tended to wear until they were mobile. And then a toddler who could walk around was put into a shorter dress. Didn't matter if you were a boy or a girl. Young children under about the age of 3 were all in dresses like that. And then women often were responsible for creating their husband's shirts. If it was a family of means, typically the man might go to a tailor for, you know, his suit coat and pants and vest and things like that, although those were things that a woman could make at home if it was a family of limited means. But across the socioeconomic scale, many women made their husband's shirts. And what you can see that's in common with all these garments is it's pretty like basic construction. You know, it's a lot of rectangles assembled together. It's not like a super precise fit of, you know, a bodice or a waist or anything. So this would be something that would fall within the realm of ability of most 19th century women. So when creating their outer garments, which do have a little bit more of a, you know, specialized fit, women had basically 2 choices, although they often did a hybrid of them. They could make dresses, make their own dresses, or hire a dressmaker to make garments for them. And sometimes women did both. They made some of their dresses and hired a dressmaker for their nicer dresses, or they might work with a dressmaker by cutting out the pieces and letting the dressmaker handle the precise fitting. So on the left, you're looking at a dress that was made by a woman named Susanna Watson, who lived in deep southern Illinois in the 1850s, and she was a farm wife. She raised sheep. She spun that wool with cotton to make the fabric. She dyed the fabric, and then she created that dress all on her own. If you were to touch it, it would feel almost like burlap. It's a very kind of like rough quality. And if you were to see it close up, you would see that it is a serviceable dress, but she's never going to be walking any runways in Paris with that gown. The collar doesn't quite line up. You can see how like a bit of the collar is sticking up. The buttons aren't very evenly spaced. So she created a like good, serviceable working dress on the farm, but not a piece of high fashion. On the right, you see a wedding dress that belonged to a woman named Elizabeth Graham in Lincoln, Illinois, who got married in 1876. Elizabeth was a farmer's daughter, so probably along the same, kind of socioeconomic plane as Susanna Watson. For her wedding, she hired a dressmaker. Her dress is very elaborate. The bodice is a very tight fit. There's a lot of ruffles and ruching and bustling going on there. And so for this special occasion, she went to someone with the expertise to, create this stylish gown, which was probably beyond the realm of her own ability. So dressmaking was a skilled profession. This is in contrast to being a seamstress. So a seamstress was someone who did what was considered more plain sewing, and often they found employment working for tailors and clothing manufacturing companies, which were mostly for men in the 19th century. And seamstresses would pick up pre-cut bundles of clothing, take them home, sew them, press them, and bring them back in. And this work paid next to nothing because seamstresses were considered unskilled labor because all women knew how to sew, so there was nothing especially, noteworthy or, commanding of a high price to know how to sew. Ironically, once the sewing machine came on the scene, women who are trained to operate sewing machines in factory settings were considered semi-skilled labor, and they were paid more than hand sewers. Dressmakers, on the other hand, it's kind of a full service operation. It's someone who would stay current on the latest style, who would act kind of as a style advisor, working with a client to give them the look that they wanted, and would create an entire garment, whole cloth for a specific individual. So this profession came with a lot of status in terms of women's occupations, which were kind of, slim pickings in the 19th century. A dressmaker might go from home to home, and she was typically received as a guest and put up in a bedroom and called Miss or Mrs. So-and-so, rather than a live-in domestic servant who was often, sheltered in like an attic or a back hallway or a kitchen and referred to by their first name. A dressmaker might also establish a shop of her own and hope to have employees working under her. And so dressmaking for someone who had this skill was kind of an avenue into the middle class for women who might otherwise be doing domestic service jobs or factory jobs, immigrant women, women of color, widows who had lost their means of support. Becoming a dressmaker was kind of like your best option for financial independence. So the inspiration for fashion came from ladies' magazines. You're looking at a Godey's right there, and Godey's is not really creating fashion whole cloth. Godey's and Peterson's and all the American magazines are looking to Europe, especially London and Paris tended to be the style centers, and they're seeing what kind of fashion plates are coming out of Europe, and they're basically copying them into their own magazines because copyright is a little bit loose loosey-goosey. So what you're seeing there is like the equivalent of looking at Vogue today. It's kind of the high style iteration of clothing. And so when women are reading fashion magazines, they're looking at these illustrations, and a woman who is up on fashion would be able to look at this and like know what was new and different about this season. You know, like maybe we're adding vertical embellishments to our skirts, or, you know, our sleeves are 3/4 length this season. And they're going to take that and either make something themselves or go to a dressmaker and use it as inspiration to be like, hey, I want this. And so they might have an entirely new dress made for themselves. A middle-class woman might have a new dress made per social season, or more typically, they would take an existing garment and they would kind of zhuzh it up a bit. They might take off whatever bow and trimmings and whatever is on it and replace it with something that looks a little more current, to kind of keep their style fresh without having to create an entirely new dress. So initially, those magazines just are kind of like writing out verbal instructions on how to make something. And a woman is pretty much going to use her own existing garment as a pattern to create a new dress. By the 1860s, sized patterns start to appear on the market, and they're pretty widely available by the 1880s. The patterns become available in the 1860s, and they're sized by the 1880s. And so this goes a long way towards democratizing fashion. All of a sudden, there are these patterns that make it a whole lot easier to create a more precise fit, and there are catalogs of patterns available that let you do, you know, anything. There's like 21 versions of sleeves there and all kinds of types of bodices. So now women who do, you know, have those basic sewing skills with the aid of a sized pattern, having elaborate or very stylish fashions are kind of within their own reach now. And the bodice that I would have brought with you if I was in person to show you is a bodice that strikes me as something that I think someone probably made at home, that someone's made the transition from hiring out a dressmaker to make a bodice that has a precise fit like that. They tried it at home. It's not super well executed when you look at it closely. There's some weird stuff going on, and the button spacing is weird. But they tried, and they felt like they could do this at this point. So the sewing machine becomes available in the 1850s. The early models were pretty clunky. They were pretty expensive. And when they broke down, they were sort of hard to fix or replace parts. After the Civil War, there's a big push on the part of companies like Singer to get machines into women's homes. So they become easier to fix. There's more interchangeable parts, and they are marketed directly to women with layaway plans where, you know, you can put down $1 and pay it off over time. And so the sewing machine makes its way into middle-class homes by the third quarter of the 19th century and working class homes by the end of the 19th century. And it really is a game changer in terms of saving women labor. A shirt that would have taken about 10 hours to make by hand now takes an hour and a half on the machine. Typical with, you know, things pertaining to women when women's work, the goalposts were moved. Fashion got a whole lot more elaborate in the 1870s as the sewing machine became more widespread. That's an example of an 1870s garment there, because if women have sewing machines, there's no reason why they can't add bows and ruffles and ruches and what have you to their garments. So now we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about maintaining clothing. And I want to ask you how much time you've invested in the clothes that you're wearing. So if I can answer, it would probably be maybe a half an hour, which is, you know, gathering up the clothes. My husband, bless his heart, sorts the laundry. I've given up on that. I've never, you know, had anything run in the wash. So I just dump it all in there, take it out and fold it. And, you know, that's it. So in the 19th century, again, women's work included sewing and mending and maintaining and making over and all these things that made it essentially a daily chore. And there we are. And that's a work basket that we have in our collection that I just love, because it's got these women's sewing implements it dates to about the late 1880s, and included in it is this poem that looks clipped from a newspaper. And I imagine this woman who, sits down with this work basket every single evening to do some mending or darning or sewing, and having this poem that was probably her favorite on hand, like we might, put a favorite picture or poem at our workstation at work, or, up on our fridge at home. So again, mending clothing starts at a very young age. I love this portrait because it shows how these skills were passed from generation to generation. Women often learn from an older female relative how to sew. It shows the little girl who's probably making clothes for her dolly. She would pretty soon thereafter be expected to help her mother with the household mending. And then it also shows what a lifetime task sewing is. That little girl can expect to be sewing and sitting in a rocking chair at the very end of her life sewing, just like her grandmother is. So we'll start with the patch. I love looking through the historic clothing collection and seeing evidence of mending on garments. To me, it's such a human touch, and it just really shows that someone wore these clothes, they lived in them, they, damaged them, they cared enough to fix them. Just the investment of time and care into garments. So a patch is basically, if there's a hole on your clothes, you take a separate piece of material and sew it on there so the hole disappears. And this is a pair of pants. I wish this was in the Illinois State Museum's collection. Sadly, it's not. This was found stuffed up in a chimney in a working man's cottage in England. It dates to about the 1820s or 30s. Someone probably put it up there to stop up a draft at some point. And I love it because you can see it's like patched on top of patched on top of patched. And we live in such a society of abundance and inexpensive textiles that, you can always just go to Walmart or go to Target and buy a new pair of pants for probably under $20 if you were pressed. In the 19th century, clothing was, textiles were more expensive. The labor that went into them was more intense. And so this working man, this might have been his only pair of pants. Maybe he had another pair for church, but you can see how really he just kept them going, just kept patching them, because, if those pants ripped, there clearly wasn't another 5 pairs hanging in his closet that he could go to. And we have such an expectation of seeing people go around and, clean mended clothing today, or, hole free clothing. I just want to imagine what it was like in the 19th century, just seeing your average person walking around, and the average person wore mended clothing. There was not brand spanking new clothing without flaws just surrounding people the way that it is today. So much so that, mending crossed all social strata. This is a gentleman's coat, and the close-up is of his sleeves that he is worn through at the elbow, and so they are very neatly patched. And this coat actually belonged to Thomas Jefferson, that he wore in the year 1800. So the President of the United States has patches on his clothing, which just shows how ubiquitous it was and what an expected part of life, that you're going to wear out your clothing and you're going to mend it and keep wearing it. Having mended clothing was something of a status symbol. So the man with all the patches on his clothes was really not able to hide or, disguise his working class status. This family is what I like to think of as 1830s Instagram. This is their family portrait. They're clearly a family of means to be able to afford a family portrait to begin with. And they have frozen their life in this idealized image of, all four kids sitting politely. The room is stylish, the room is clean, all the kids' clothes are clean and well laundered, and you don't see any rips and tears, because this is like what gentility looks like. And especially the first half of the 19th century, there's this idea in the new republic that is the United States, that social mobility is possible, right? We've broken away from England, which is a monarchy and which has, like a peerage and everything, and people are kind of structured in a social hierarchy. In America, theoretically, anything is possible. Of course, we know that anything is possible if you're a white man, and if you're, a woman, a person of color, an immigrant, you're going to have a harder time of it. But the idea of the social mobility, that if all you do is work hard and kind of learn the rules of being a well-bred person from a domestic advice manual or what have you, then you can kind of make it and make it into the middle class and be genteel. That's what this family is trying to show off, and clothing is a huge part of it. So women's mending of clothing is not simply to like close up a hole in your clothes so you don't feel a breeze. It's really to like help create your family's status and maintain it, and be part of that attempt to rise. On the other hand, having clothing that was ragged or torn was kind of a social signifier in the 19th century, that someone is, not really in that middle class, not genteel, possibly even a threat to the social order. You're looking at a painting from 1894 of a kind of gang of street youth in New York City, and they're little kids, so they're not like off causing serious trouble, but still they're making people uneasy. That one person back there is clutching the child to her, and these kids are going to grow up, and you're meant to kind of feel like, well, where's their mom? They're walking around, they're unsupervised, their clothes are torn, no one's really looking out for them and kind of guiding their path. And so one imagines that in 10 years or so, they might, present a legitimate threat to the social order as viewed by your typical, like middle class person. And again, the tattered clothes are part of that. They show that no one is taking care of them or taking the time to keep their clothes in good order. So mending and sewing is something that pretty much crosses the economic spectrum. Unless you were like Mrs. Astor in New York City, you probably could expect to sew. Certainly in Illinois, I've read a lot of letters by 19th century Illinois women, and I have not found a single one where a woman doesn't mention sewing or mending at some point. That's not to say that women didn't have domestic help. They did. In the 19th century, there are a lot of immigrants, at first from Ireland and Germany, and later in the century from more southern and eastern European countries, who provide a labor pool to have domestic help. So about 30% of the people kept a domestic servant in the 19th century. But it wasn't like a Downton Abbey thing. It wasn't a, now I have a servant, I'm going to put my feet up and be a lady of leisure. It's now I have an extra pair of hands in a house that is brimming with work to do. And so there's a delegation of tasks, and your domestic servants are going to get assigned things like laundry or cooking or dishes or emptying the coal scuttles, things that are heavy or dirty or laborious. There's plenty of work to go around. So typically the lady of the house is going to take the sewing for herself, because it's something that she can do sitting in a rocking chair in her parlor while someone reads to her. It's comparatively like lighter work. So if you're going to divide up the work, it goes to the lady of the house, and your domestic servant probably has her hands full with all that heavy work. So again, this is a well-to-do woman. Her name is Isabel Flagg. She went by Belle, and she married into the Hatch family. Her father-in-law was the Secretary of State of Illinois in the 1860s. So she led a very comfortable life. This is one of her nice silk bodices, and under her arms, she's got a patch right there, and there's a little darn on her elbow. So again, it shows that, even though she's a fairly well-to-do woman, her clothes get, damaged, and she mends them and she keeps wearing them. And what's fascinating about Belle is we got about a half a dozen of her bodices in the donation of her family's clothing, and every single one of them has a patch right about the same place under her arm. And so my theory is that there's something about the way that she moved and the way that her corset fit and the way that she swung her arms that she stubbornly wore a hole in every single bodice she owned. But what can you do? She fixed it and moved on. So darning is a process of basically reweaving a hole in your fabric. Unlike sticking another piece of fabric on as a patch, you want to kind of open up the hole. That black thing is a darning egg, which you would use to keep the hole open wide. And you're basically going to take darning thread and reweave the part that's been gone. And so these are two mended items from our collection. The mittens I love because they started out being darned very neatly with black thread or black yarn that kind of coordinated with the mittens. And by the end, clearly someone gave up and they're like, whatever. And they are just trying to keep the hole closed. And you can see that, the darning isn't very neat or especially skillful and it doesn't match, but, at least the snow's not getting on their fingers anymore. The socks on the right, it's a little bit hard to tell, but those are Belle Hatch's socks. So the lady from the previous slide, and they are darned on the heel and the toe, and they're practically darned on top of darned. And I just love it because it's like, this must have been her favorite pair of socks. And she put so much time into this pair of socks, probably more time into one pair of socks than I've spent maintaining my entire wardrobe today. But again, that was just life, people were living more physical lives than we do today. And that took its toll on their textiles. And so sitting down with your work basket every single night to mend whatever has been ripped or torn is just a daily fact of life for women. So now we're going to talk about making over clothing. The Delineator, a magazine from the 19th century, says there are very few who do not renovate and make over their old dresses when they have grown too old-fashioned to be presentable. So making over is basically taking an old dress and freshening it up to make it look new again. And if anyone's read Little Women, you remember that Meg had a blue dress that she said was freshly turned and trimmed, and it felt almost like a new one. So the first thing one might do to make over clothing is to cut it down for a child. So let's say you've got a dress and it's got 8 yards of fabric in it, and you've put it through the wringer, you've done your housework in it, it's kind of soiled and maybe faded. Somewhere in that 8 yards, there's going to be a couple decent yards left that you can cut apart and make into a child's clothes. Similarly, if your husband has worn out his knees of his pants, you could cut those pants down and make them into child's clothes. You might also take remnants of either old clothes or of fabrics left over from sewing projects and reform them into something new. So you're looking there at a petticoat. It's a quilted petticoat from the 1850s, and you're looking at the underside. So I've got it flipped inside out. If I were to flip it right side out, it would be all one fabric on the outside, so it's fine. Inside, there's 5 different patterns of calico in there. And so either someone, raided their scrap bag or they cut apart some old garments, but they didn't let them go to waste. They, created something entirely new and useful out of them. You might just take apart clothing and kind of reformat it to make it work again, like Meg's turned and trimmed dress. So especially with garments that were meant for kind of work around the house dresses, it was helpful to have them in dark colored, small figured calicos. So the dark color hides staining and soiling, and the small figure means that if you do need to cut it apart and rework it, then it's going to be easier on you to match up that pattern again. So one trick that women did was sometimes they would cut their sleeves off, and then if the elbows were worn, they would flip it around so the worn part was in the kind of crook of their elbow and the fresh side was in the outside. Or you might, slim down some yardage of your skirt, or cut out a stain and rework it. Yeah. And I love this garment. I would have brought the bodice and sleeves if I was with you in person. This shows how someone remade a dress that started its life in the 1860s and got a hold of it in the 1890s and tried to redo it. So the telltale part of the 1860s is that bodice part. The two darts at the waist and the drooped shoulders are very classically 1860s. Someone probably wore that dress, maybe put it away for a while, and then someone else found it in a trunk and realized there's a lot of really nice fabric and it's still in good condition. So they took it apart. They slimmed down the skirt into an A-line. They took some of the excess skirt fabric and created those super poofy sleeves that were characteristic of the 1890s. And then boom, whole new dress. We're going to switch gears to washing clothing right now, another of women's labors. And the first half of the 19th century saw kind of a transformation in people's ideas about washing clothes. And it got tied in with that sort of idea of social mobility and about being able to rise in society if you do the right things. And one of those right things was having clean clothes. Pre-American Revolution, people were a little less, fussy about the quality of their clothes, especially, if you're not among the elite. You would expect that your clothes get kind of grimy. Laundry tended to happen less frequently. And then somewhere in the 19th century, this kind of social mobility got wrapped in with starting to improve kind of sanitation techniques and also the Great Awakening. So there's a moral element in there. And so being clean was really kind of correlated with being respectable. And so this motto, cleanliness is next to godliness, they've literally merged, doing laundry and keeping your house clean with like morality. And so the contrast of the poor family on the left side who are kind of living in squalor with these ragged clothes, you're sort of begged the question like, well, do they, are they living in squalor because they're poor, or are they poor because they're living in squalor and they're not taking the proper care to keep themselves clean? And by contrast, on the right side, you've got this, well-kept family that is clearly also happy and prosperous, and that's all tied together with cleanliness too. Which is a bummer for women, because whose job is it to keep the house clean and keep the clothes clean? It's women's job. So doing laundry was pretty much a weekly task by the 19th century and into the 20th century. The things that you would wash would be basically, you could wash cotton calicos, although you had to not wash them at as high a temperature. And you would wash a lot of undergarments. So the chemise, the petticoats, the drawers for men, the white shirts, all of that gets like boiled weekly, and you try to keep fresh chemises, fresh petticoats, fresh shirts on hand. And so with all those white things going into the wash, that could lead to some confusion. So very often you find laundry marks on 19th century undergarments. And this is literally someone writing their name or embroidering an initial or stenciling their name onto their undergarments, which serves the same purpose as if you're sending a kid off to camp with his name written in Sharpie in his underpants. That's to make sure that the right garment goes back to the right person after the wash. And I love it when I find a laundry mark on clothing in our collection. Again, it's just such a nice, like, personal tie to the garment. So laundry is a big, huge bummer. People called it the great domestic dread of the household. It was just very labor intensive, like really physically hard work. This is the process as Catherine Beecher lays it out in the 1840s. It involves sorting and soaking clothes and washing, scrubbing on a scrub board. You would use lye soap that was often made at home by hand, and the lye is very caustic and is rough on your hands. A lot of hauling water, boiling water, rinsing water, wringing clothes out, and this is like per load. So, rinse and repeat for however many loads of laundry you have in your household. Laundry is such a bummer that it's kind of like an established fact. And this is a comic ballad that was first printed in the 1830s about washing day, a proper ballad for wet weather. And so the gist of it is it's washing day in this man's house, and he's talking about his wife. My Kate, she is a bonny wife. There's none so free from evil, unless upon a washing day, and then she is the devil. I met a friend who asked of me, how long's poor Kate been dead, lamenting the good creature gone, and sorry I was wed to such a scolding vixen while he had been far away. The truth was he chanced to come upon a washing day. So it's still Kate. She's just in a sour mood because it's washing day, and there's an illustration of her like terrorizing the guest and the children with the chair, because she's got to do laundry. And in this song, the writer of the song like brings home a guest to dinner when she's already got her hands full doing the wash. So washing was the first thing that people hired out if they could, if they had some disposable income, and maybe you can't afford to keep a live-in domestic servant, but you can hire a little bit of help. Usually people hired someone to help them wash their clothes and take that off their plate. And so washing clothing became an avenue of employment for a lot of women. Again, typically women of color, immigrant women, widowed women would either take in washing into their homes, or they would go from house to house doing the laundry. Taking laundry into their homes was helpful, especially if they had small children at home and no support, no husband around, because it was something that you could do and still keep an eye on your kids. Factory work is kind of out for a woman who's got to be home because she has small children, but laundry work can be done at home with kids' help. And then finally, we're going to talk about what to do with clothing when you're done with them. In our world, clothing passes through our lives and, doesn't stay very long. We might have a garment or two that we've saved from years or decades ago because they're special, but, most of our clothing has sort of a finite lifespan with us, and then it moves along into someone else's experience. In the 19th century, that's, somewhat the case, but the difference is that people are really trying to wring all the usefulness out of textiles that they can. Again, it's more expensive to buy, and there's a lot of sweat equity sunk into those clothes and textiles. So one of the most basic ways to recycle clothing is to just cut it up and turn it into something else. So a doll or a sewing kit might have started its life as, a garment of clothing and still had a little bit of life left in a tiny corner of it. And so there it was. People also saved their rags, and this is also a Little Women reference. You remember Amy had to bring limes into school to keep her social standing, but it wasn't her turn for the rag money yet. So the rags were going to the American paper industry, which literally depended on those rags. No rags, no paper. Paper had a very high content of either cotton or linen. And so ladies were encouraged to save their rags, and houses would have a rag bag. And they could take those rags and either take them into the general store and exchange them for credit, or there might be a rag man, a peddler, who would come around and buy rags off of people. And then all those rags women were employed then to like sort through them and to cut off any, you know, buttons or hooks and eyes and things like that and cut them up. And then they would get turned into paper. You might cut down clothing and make it into something like a quilt. So this is a quilt that's made from pieces of old suiting and shirts that's in our collection. And this is something that kind of breaks along class lines. So women who were in rural areas of the country that are kind of far away from economic centers, or women of more limited means, tended to cut down their clothes and make it into a quilt. Middle-class ladies, if they were quilting, often would go buy calicos and things and, like, you know, make special patterns, and they might buy their fabrics specially to make their quilts. You might turn your clothing into a rag rug as well. So the paper industry wanted linen and cotton. Wool clothing could be turned into rugs like this. So you would take your wool clothing, cut it apart, sew it into strips end to end, and then wind it into a ball, which was a great busy work task for kids. And then you might either braid it into a rug yourself, or there were places you could send away and have a rug made. And so a newspaper of the 19th century talked about a man strolling over his rag rug and kind of walking down memory lane because he saw the remnants of all these suits that were very important to him in his lifestyle, in his life. And then I want to contrast that with fast fashion. We're going to speed ahead several decades. So the evolution from producers to consumers was pretty gradual, and it happened over most of the course of the 20th century. When the 20th century started, there were certainly ready-made clothes available to women, but most women, I would say, probably were still making their kids' clothes and several of their own garments. By the end of the 20th century, there's a huge drop-off in needlework skills, and I say this from personal experience because my mother grew up knowing how to sew. She knew how to knit. She would make her own clothes. She would make things for me, and I never showed any interest in learning how to sew, and she didn't feel like making me, so I got none of those skills. So literally hundreds of years of female needlework skills stop exactly with me and my family. And I'm not the only one. We have embraced a model of consumerism where clothing has, as the ready-made clothing has developed, we've made the choice to save our time and spend our money on clothes, and then clothing has progressively gotten less expensive to the point where now if you want to make a garment, it would probably cost you more to buy the notions and the fabric, let alone your investment of time, than to just go out and buy something similar. So fast fashion is fast. There's a short turnaround from runway to retail. So when I was growing up, I remember there being kind of like 2 seasons of new clothes. There was like spring and there was fall. Now we're in a time where there are 52 micro seasons. So literally every week there are new styles being rolled out, especially at stores like H&M or Zara that kind of specialize in a fast turnover. These clothes are inexpensive. They are like cheap to buy, but they're also kind of cheaply made. They're made of low quality materials and usually produced overseas in countries with limited labor laws. So when we buy a shirt inexpensively, someone is paying for that, and it's usually a woman working on the other side of the world who's not getting paid a living wage. Fast fashion is also hard on the environment. It's terrible for rivers and water in areas where textiles are dyed. Polyester produces a lot of microplastics that wind up in our oceans. And then a lot of clothing just gets thrown away. We have become so disinvested from our clothing that, you know, when it becomes damaged, when there's a hole or a stain in it, you know, what do you do with it? You just kind of throw it out and go buy another one. And then fast fashion is hard on garment workers. So Essentially, there used to be a lot of garment factories in the United States in the 19th and early 20th century. And you're probably all familiar with the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, which is kind of the most famous and horrific example of unsafe labor practices and people being worked long hours for low pay in unsafe conditions. By the time of the New Deal legislation in the 1930s, workers' rights had strengthened considerably in the United States. We had laws limiting the number of hours that people could work and establishing health and safety standards. And this becomes more expensive to clothing producers, so they took those businesses and shipped them overseas to countries whose laws were a little bit more lax. Hence, most of the clothing that we purchase in America today is being made somewhere else for workers that wouldn't get paid as much as American workers. And so what can we do about it? It's a huge system, you know, like for me, I can't start making my clothes because I don't have the skills to, you know, so, and we're busy people who, you know, don't have time to create an entire wardrobe for ourselves. So what we can do to, you know, do our part to keep clothing out of landfills is to buy less. We're encouraged to follow a capitalist model of buy. You know, if you see something and it's on sale, you might as well just snap it up because it's not that much and whatever. We can choose clothes that are kind of well made and more classic styles, and we can make those clothes last. And I just want to wind up with some things to think about, maybe questions for us to discuss. How has shopping for clothing changed in your lifetime? How has the shopping experience different for you than it was for your parents? How has caring for clothing changed in your lifetime? And how has your attitude about clothing changed in your lifetime? So we can talk about some of these. We can talk about none of these. You can ask me a question. If anyone has a story to share about making or mending clothing, I'd love to hear it. And so now I'm going to stop talking and open it up.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have questions? We all learned a lot, I'm sure, from all that we heard. Or comments on those questions that she gave us?
It's an area I've thought a lot about in terms of waste.
Right.
And our climate,
Right.
all of that.
Yep.
But the clothes are also made to be destroyed and ripped within 2 or 3 wearings. I remember when my oldest boy was in high school and on a band trip, we went someplace and they had to stop at a mall and go to Old Navy. And I walked in there with my son and I'm looking at all these things and all the girls are getting hysterical. Oh, $5 for a t-shirt. And I went up to one and I said, it's all polyester. Look at the thread. I said, the thread is not even cotton. It is a fishing line. It was plastic, which meant if you wore it twice, it was purposely designed to rip, and you did not have much of a what do they call it? Seam allowance. It was really close. I said, it is designed to rip apart after 2 washings, and you're wasting a lot of money. Yeah.
You purchase clothes, they're surged. And there is no seam allowance.
So I have a quick story. Yeah. For me, clothing is very nostalgic, family-wise. I still have in my closet, I have my grandfather's bowling shirt with his name on it. I have the sweater my father was wearing when he was 91. One of my mother's plaid skirts from the 50s, and on and on. And we were a family that saved rags and took them to the rag place for money, along with tin cans and newspapers. And so as an aside to that, I always did that with my dad, so I have strong memories of doing that with him. And this is a quick story. Because we were doing that, the precursor to Space Mountain, the ride that's inside, was actually being made in my hometown of North Tonawanda, New York. and that my father knew the guys. So right next to the rag recycling place, they were building this structure, and they had my dad and I go on it. And they were trying it out, and we got stuck at the top, and they had to get a ladder and bring us down. It was all because we were recycling rags. That's a real important story for me. And I have rags. I mean, I had somebody come and help me clean my house, and they brought paper towels, and I thought, oh yeah, a million old T-shirts. And so, you know, I was brought up to be frugal about clothing. My mother liked to dress really well, so she only bought really good clothing. So it was a little here and a little there, and I still have a bunch of her high quality clothing. So for me, it's really important, clothing. So I just wanted to add that.
That's wonderful. Yeah, clothing is so personal. I still have some of my dad's shirts, and my dad's passed. Every once in a while, I'll go in the closet and like kind of smell them to, you know, like smell what my dad smelled like again.
My mom made a pillow out of my dad's bowling shirt, which has his name.
Cool.
But I came from a family of seamstresses, people that knew how to sew. But we were just talking about how patterns have gotten so expensive.
They're on sale.
My granddaughter's 13, and I was going to help her make a pair of pajama pants. Well, the pattern was terribly expensive, so to get your money's worth, you're going to have to use it quite a few times, which she probably will. But my mom's in assisted living now, and one of her lap blankets is a patchwork of corduroy, different colors, and every time I go, she talks about, well, these were you kids' pants, pieces of your kids' pants.
Oh, nice.
So it's real colorful, but kind of cool corduroy, just a nice lap blanket. So really interesting topic.
I have
Glad I came.
similar stories. When Barbie came out, my mother said that is the most hideous doll she'd ever seen. And my aunt bought me a Madame Alexander, which was proportional. But the clothes cost a fortune. And my mom made her a coat because my mother was also short like I am. She had to shorten her coat, so she made a coat for the doll from the hem that she took off her coat. And a lady they made a whole box of clothes for my doll. And I'm sleeping under one of my aunt's quilts that she made from leftover scraps of making dresses for my mother and other people in her family.
Oh, wow. That's really meaningful.
Well, and something else that my oldest boy laughs at me, but he's picked it up, and now he's married, and his poor wife has to adapt with the laundry, because I always stressed natural fibers, and you've got to have at least a minimum of 60% natural fibers in the thing, because but you can find things that are 95% natural fibers, and then the rest is spandex or whatnot. But you wash them in cold water. I do soak ahead of time. I wash, and then most things are. Our joke in the family was on laundry day down in the basement was the jungle, because we'd put things on hangers and you air dry them. And if it's nice weather, you hang them outside. My neighbors still laugh at me because I've got things hanging outside, but it lasts longer and they smell nice, and they're actually
Spandex is destroyed by heat.
I didn't know that.
And I got a little snippet from a consumer report that talks about how fabric softener is not good.
Oh, I stopped using
White vinegar for the rinse.
Yeah, so I've quit using fabric softener. I can't
Dryer
stand.
sheets are worse.
I can't
Oh, yeah.
stand clothes that smell like fabric softener, like it's a perfume. And
It's a
so-
greasy film on your clothes.
Yeah.
It won't absorb. You used
But
to.
it destroys your machines.
Oh, yeah.
The sheets destroy your machines. If you use fabric softener in the wash, it ends up getting in the dryer as well. and all that stuff clings to parts you can't see.
Mhm.
I didn't know.
Pull out your lid trap and hold it up to the light and look at everything that's on the trap.
Never thought about what it was.
I'm going to bring a little local history in.
Okay, sorry.
So there's a women's club, the women's club movement post-Civil War. Women were doing a lot of activism and self-education. But in Macomb, we have a club called 20 Monday Dames, and it still exists, and there still are 25 of them. One of the requirements are that you have to be married. And it was on Monday because Monday was the wash day. So these were women that it's a much of a affluent club, right? So if you had someone that could come in on Monday and do your laundry, do your wash for you and watch your kids, you could go to your club meeting of the double XMD is what they call themselves. So yeah, they're still around today. I don't know if they still do wash on Monday, but that's the turn of the century local club that's related to that washing task. Yeah, so there you go, a little local history.
I've got a question, Erika. Relatively recent, I watched the YouTube of your exhibit at the State Museum during COVID, and I think it was the one about undergarments and the 19th century dresses. And there was, at the very end, mention about, and if you want it was a book, not a pamphlet, of this program, and the thing is, I couldn't get the information. Do you still have that book? Can I get a copy?
I can, yes. Do you, yeah, if you email me, I can send you a copy.
Oh,
Or we can send it to the museum and we can get it to Stasia. Stasia's one of our regular volunteers. So.
Okay, sounds good. I'll do that.
One, two. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Because it looked like a wonderful exhibit, and and then I love the part that you went behind the scenes into the stack and you were pulling things out and showing everything. Like, we're seeing things that we'd never see in person. So that was the benefit of COVID.
Thank
didn't
you.
know
Yeah.
that. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you. That was a fun exhibit. I hope they'll let me do a 20th century version soon. Go back to it.
I didn't know rag bags. You could take the rags and was made into paper. I didn't know that. I mean, our rag bag was for cleaning and dusting and that sort of thing. So I thought that was interesting.
Kirk Douglas.
Yeah,
wrote his biography.
My husband's the same way. He when he tears a t-shirt, his first thought is like, oh no, I tore a t-shirt. And his second thought is, ooh, oh boy, more rags.
They look so much better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They
We have a rag bag here, right there.
Oh, I got one.
But it's got to be natural fibers. You can't use the synthetic.
Yeah.
Well, I bought a brand new pair of Eddie Bauer jeans, and they are made of 100% plastic bottles. I couldn't believe it, and it made me think: do I want these? I mean, I didn't know how I felt about it. It's not cotton.
It's going to be hot.
Are they comfortable?
Well, they're kind of stretchy
Oh.
and they're comfortable.
But are they hot?
I probably won't wear them in real hot weather, but I just thought that was kind of odd.
There's a name for one of the fabrics
Yeah.
that is recycled plastics, basically. And they're putting it into a lot of jeans.
Durable, maybe.
I'll see how long
Maybe
they
not a
last.
stretch or something.
I like them new. So.
Next time you come in, you have to wear them.
I took a picture of the tag because I thought it still kind of blows my mind that that's what they're made of.
Well, Erika, you asked about our shopping habits. And I'm one who would prefer to go try clothes on. But we have so few places to do that now.
Here, yeah.
Anywhere.
Anywhere. A lot of
Anywhere.
places.
The stores are shutting down, and the only choice is to order online, and then you send everything back.
It's true. There's been such an arc, it was like first there was the boutiques and the clothing stores and department stores, and then it was the mall, and we all went to the mall and could buy clothes, but that's on the decline, and now it's all online. And yeah, you just kind of order and hope for the best. But it means, okay, it takes like a week for my thing to get here. Then I try it on and hope it fits, and I might have to send it back and then send them it's like a weeks long process now.
Carbon footprint.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a quick comment. Online, there is a company out of the UK. It's a husband and wife. They make jackets called, I think I may have this wrong. I think it's Paynter. They make jackets. They make, I think, 250 per batch. They explain the entire process, where the fabric comes from, who sews it, and everything. They put that out online, and they are gone in 10 minutes, and they cost $450.
I was just gonna ask you, what's the?
They're like barn jackets, what we would have called them. It's straight kind of, they call them working coats, other things, but I think anybody that's in, and their labels are always special. I think anybody that's really into clothing and understands the whole process, they're like the supreme find. So I thought that was interesting.
There is some clothing out there, but the price point is
$400. I'd love to have one. I can't afford it. But the other thing is, I don't know, my daughter and her friends, hunting for clothing at used clothing stores is a thing. And I'm really proud of these young women, because they will find things and they can maybe come back with nothing, which makes me happier. But they are serious about doing that. My daughter and some of her friends remake things out of stuff. And I save old clothing. If the fabric is really good, I hang on to it, and they will raid my clothing mess. So yeah, so I'm really proud of her.
That's great.
But you mentioned, the shopping online now, but when I was growing up, and I grew up in rural Illinois, and we didn't have, the nearest store was like 40 miles away from where we lived and stuff. And if my mom didn't make the clothing, then there's Montgomery Ward catalog and the Sears catalog. Yeah.
And JCPenney's.
And JCPenney's, yes, catalogs. And a lot of our clothes, that's how we got them. But then to take them back if they didn't, then you had to drive somewhere to take it back to the catalog store. But still. Yeah.
That's true. We've almost come full circle with the mail order. But like you mentioned too, the internet has given us a lot of like niche companies, and there are companies out there who are, trying to be sustainable and environment friendly and labor friendly and things like that. So it is an option, but like you said, it's also very expensive. So it begs the question, like, who can afford to, shop ethically like that? It's kind of a privilege for people who can drop $450 on a jacket.
But if you go back to think about like the percentage, like when people were custom making dresses, like late 1880s, what percentage of their salary did they spend on that one dress, right? We've got into this like mindset that we're only going to spend so much money.
Right.
But if we were to buy one $400 jacket that we wore for 10 years, then it's about the same. So it's just a matter of mindset, maybe.
I think that's true.
Wiring.
No, you're 100% right. We assume that we're going to have like huge wardrobes, and our jacket is going to be one of like, 5 jackets that we have. And, like that idea of just a couple really well-made quality things, it's a different mindset.
Hard to do.
I wanted to ask Erika, are you familiar with a quilt that is owned by, I want to say the American Craft Museum, but they've changed their name to the Museum of Art and Design? That a woman took a photograph of these sewing companies in another country that we get our clothes made by, and she made a quilt from labels of clothes. And she put something out there that she was looking for designer labels. She was inundated. She goes, here's these people that can afford to buy Armani, cutting the labels out and sending them to her.
Wow. That's awesome. No, I hadn't heard of that, but I'm going to Google that.
And you might be able to find it if you went to the MAD website. I don't know. Or I might have a picture of it, but I have to dig it out.
Cool. That's awesome. Thank you for telling me.
One way to recycle is through rummage sales.
Mhm.
Our church has an annual one. And so I like to think that clothing gets a second life. And
For resale shops, that's
yeah, yeah. I used to help in the afternoons on a Friday, and that's when high schoolers would come in after school and look through the clothing racks looking for something unusual or old. So I always like to see them come in.
So is the majority of clothing that you're collecting, you want a story with it? You want it made, possibly made in Illinois or connected to a family in Illinois?
Yes, at this point. So there are some things with like we don't have much at all, and we'd kind of, take anything. But clothing, since we have a pretty extensive collection, then at this point, yeah, it needs to have a strong connection to Illinois. Same with quilts too. We have the predecessor in my role was a quilt person, and so she built up a collection. So we have 500 quilts now. So at this point, it's like, well, now it needs to be kind of an exceptional quilt because we really have a lot of quilts, and it's not a matter of how cool the object is. It's just it really comes down to storage at the end of the day, and maybe our hosts know too. As much storage space as a museum has, it's it always seems like you're running out of space.
Well, this has been great. Is there any other questions before we? Thank you all. Thank you, Erika.
so much,
Do you have anything you want
No, just thank you. I think
Yeah.
we all learned a lot, and
Yeah.
yeah, great conversation.
And we'll-
And it's not storming at all. In fact, the
I
sun
know.
is coming.
I know. I saw that out the window. It's like, oh, it just figures.
But if you had driven,
It's true.
We could have seen those artifacts up in front of us.
Well, we'll have to schedule another time, right?
Well,
A
exactly.
visit, yeah.
Oh, that's right, we could visit.
Yes, anytime. I would love to come in person and, visit you. So yes, thank you. Thanks for the patience and flexibility with the going virtual. And thank you for being a lovely audience too. This was a lot of fun.
And where's
Thank
your
you.
cat?
Oh, yeah.
That was your-
What happened to the cat?
Oh, did you see the kitty?
Of course you did. It was like, I know this happened, in fact, this coming Thursday at the meeting, I'm like, everyone's gonna have trouble with their cats going into the street.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Erika.